At the request of the mayors of Columbus and Cleveland, as you know, last weekend we called on the Ohio National Guard to assist police forces in those two cities. I want to reiterate what I said this weekend and last week. Protesters who are expressing outrage, that protesting, demonstrating is certainly not only understandable, but it is very appropriate. One of the sad things that we have seen is that some violent individuals have masked, or because of their violence, have drowned out some of the voices of reason and some of the voices of those who are talking about things that we all should be talking about. So that has been, I know, a challenge. I talked again to the mayors of the major cities today, 11:30, and you know, the mayors, I think I can speak for them. I don't usually speak for mayors, but what they told me is that the vast majority of demonstrators have been peaceful. The vast majority of demonstrators want to or want to talk, want to protest, want to get people's attention about very legitimate issues. The mayors pointed out to me that a certain small percentage of the people who are out there are the ones who are focused on violence, vandalism, and that is, you know, that is a sad thing. Our Ohio National Guard, we're very proud of the Ohio National Guard. For more than 230 years, our Ohio National Guard has been made up of our citizens, whose mission is to protect their fellow citizens. The members of the Guard are our friends, they're our neighbors, they're people that we run into. They're there for us in times of natural disaster, when they're called upon to help, in times of war, in times when local protection and additional law enforcement help is needed, both here in Ohio and across the country and sometimes across the world. So I was very honored after I became governor to ask John Harris to be the head of the Ohio National Guard. Major General John Harris serves as the Ohio Adjutant General and Commander of the Ohio National Guard. He joins us today also, I believe, from, well, he's outside downtown Columbus. And General Harris, thank you for joining us. And I just want to start by getting a report from you, but maybe start by asking this question. I know we were asked by the Secretary of Defense to send some members of the Ohio National Guard to Washington, D.C. to help protect our nation's capital. I wonder if you could give us an update on that, and then give us an update on your men and women who are deployed across the state.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, Governor. Regarding the mission in Washington, D.C., we did this morning send 100 of our trained soldiers to Washington, D.C. to support that mission that was requested by the Secretary of Defense. Since Washington, D.C. does not have a governor, the Secretary of Defense fills that role, and he's the one that requested the National Guard to come there to support that. Those folks will be providing security at the White House, at critical monuments, as well as protecting businesses to help the Secretary of Defense.
Well, that is great, General. Can you want to talk a little bit about what your mission has been after the Guard was called up last week, your mission in Cleveland and your mission in Columbus?
Yes, sir. We called up a force on Saturday, as you directed. We deployed what's called our National Guard Response Force to two cities at the request of the governors. That was Columbus and Cleveland. And I want to point out that that was at the request of those mayors of those cities. We are not in charge in these cities. The National Guard has not come in to take over. We are here to support the mayors and the chiefs of those two cities. They remain the lead agencies. I'd like to talk just a bit about our National Guard Response Force. That force is specifically trained for this type of mission. It's comprised of men and women from our military police units around the state. Some of them serve in law enforcement jobs in their civilian capacity. And their job is to assist local law enforcement to protect life, protect property, and to restore order if that's what's necessary. But I'd like to point out, Governor, that this National Guard Response Force is comprised of citizen soldiers. These people have day jobs, citizen airmen. The people behind me are part of that National Guard Response Force. And I was very intentional to ask them not to wear their equipment today, not to wear their gear, because I want you to see their faces and know that these are your neighbors, these are your coworkers, these are people that you know. In fact, there's a member of this task force behind me who has been on duty for 3 months because we called her to duty to assist in the prisons. And when that mission there was done, she went into a 2-week quarantine. And at the end of that 2-week quarantine, when it was time to go home, because of her specialized skills, we called her again on Saturday, and she was here Saturday night. That young airman has a 2-year-old and a 1-year-old child at home. And she did not hesitate to answer the call of duty when she was called. That's the kind of person that comprises our National Guard Response Force. There's a young soldier here. He works security, he works loss protection, loss prevention at a local mall here, just finished his associate's degree. He volunteers on the advisory board at his local high school, and we pulled him away from those duties to come here to do this, to protect the citizens of the state of Ohio. Those are the kinds of young men and women that comprise our National Guard Response Force. What will they be doing here? First of all, their challenge is to responsibly conduct their mission sets. As I said, they're protecting critical assets. They're doing crowd control. They're doing traffic control points. But what's most important, again, is that they're in support of local law enforcement doing that. A key principle of the execution of their duties is what we call graduated response. We do nothing except use minimal force necessary to complete the mission. We use minimum force necessary to complete the mission. We have a wide array of equipment, a wide assortment of non-lethal systems that allow us to do that. But most importantly, we conduct our mission with dignity and respect, regardless of who the people are. If we have to protect a protester, if their life is in jeopardy, we will do that. If we have to protect a rioter whose life is in jeopardy, it's our responsibility to do that, and we will treat every person that we come across in this mission with dignity and respect. And as we move forward, we continue to build capacity. We're a very large National Guard, and we continue to train, refresh, and equip additional forces as we go forward to ensure that we're prepared to respond if you get a call, sir, from another mayor somewhere in the state of Ohio.
Well, General, thank you very much. You know, the men and women of the Guard are so very, very impressive. Please thank both of them, but also thank, you know, all of your men and women in the Guard. We are very, 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 very proud of them. We're proud of you. We're proud of what they all do every single day. And before I let you go, you also, I believe, have some members of the Guard who are out today, who are working nursing homes and taking tests, swabs, and you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, sir. You gave us a directive as a cabinet and your senior team to make sure we protect the most vulnerable people in Ohio, and this is a major step towards doing that. We know that the people in the nursing homes are not only older, but they're also, many of them have underlying medical conditions. So we will go into the nursing homes all over the state. There are over 960 of them around Ohio, and our mission will be to test the staff, because that's the vector that usually takes the disease in and out of the nursing home. So we will test all the staff that we can, and we will, based on a clinical assessment given to us by the Department of Health, we will select residents of those nursing homes to get a sense of what the disease is in the nursing home, and then an aftercare team will come in and make recommendations on how best to manage the disease inside the nursing home, or how to keep it out if it's not there.
Great. Well,
but sir, that's one mission amongst many that we're doing. We have over 2,000 guardsmen on duty today. We still have people assisting corrections officers. We still have over 500 soldiers in the food banks. And this new mission, testing in the nursing home, simply demonstrates the vast array of capabilities that we have in the Ohio National Guard.
General, thank you very, very much. I think that kind of demonstrates some of the diversity that you have as far as skill sets that you have in the Ohio National Guard, and we're very, very proud of you and proud of the men and women. And let me just say finally, both in regard to the Ohio State Highway Patrol and to the National Guard, their mission out there is to assist. Their mission is to assist local law enforcement. Their mission is to assist the local mayors, local chiefs of police, and they take that responsibility very, very seriously. But our mayors are doing a good job. They are managing sometimes very tense situations. Our chiefs of police are doing a good job, and so we're here to help them, and we'll continue to help them whenever they need any kind of help. But they're doing a very, very, very good job.